Thank you. So I want to thank everybody for being here, for being willing to be open to a perspective that's based on personal lived experience. The whole team, Jen and the whole team have been wonderful and supportive. The best tech support I've gotten doing anything, including like major conferences. I won't tell on them right now, but if you look me up, you'll see which ones I've done. You guys are the best team yet. So I was also really thrilled when looking at the information, the title of the conference, its purpose. I'm like, wow, we need to have these conversations. And so part of where I'm coming from in my perspective is yes, this Wildflower Alliance community that totally changed my life, got me a life, and it told me that people were designed to heal, that that's a natural process, and that maybe what I had wasn't a mental illness or a brain defect, but maybe what I had was a reaction. Maybe I was doing my best to adapt to a world that I was struggling to figure out it and how I fit into it. One of the approaches we use is alternatives to suicide. Instead of focusing on trying to make somebody stop in a moment, focusing on why would they want to end their lives and what keeps them attached to the planet. And so it's more about supporting somebody to create a life that they might want to live versus coming in with force and stopping something. Instead, coming in with curiosity. How can this be your solution? I'm interested in what the problem is. What's the context of distress? Um, and I'm also a trainer for Hearing Voices USA and a trainer for intentional peer support. But this is the other part that brings me here. That in my experience, I came to a point in my life where I could no longer bear reality. In my struggle to make sense of the senseless, I became lost. I was told to believe in a reality that did not match what my heart, mind, and soul and body knew to be true. Research has shown that this can be a necessary protective response to trauma. The effect was that the only certainty I had was that impending doom would be my constant companion in a hostile world. My efforts to find a path upon which some piece of me could survive, my soul is shattered and contorted. When I sought help, instead of finding care for and understanding of my own true self, my identity was stolen by diagnosis. And for me, I was told I had a serious mental illness, that I'd be on these very strong psych drugs the rest of my life, and I should be grateful for moments of time when I'm not in a hospital. Uh, it was hard, the previous speaker talked about how does that affect somebody's identity? To be told there's something fundamentally wrong with them. It was really tough. In the mental health system, there were moments where I had care with human connection. There were moments when people talked to me like I was a person. And those were like, gave me so much hope and validation. Or I thought, well, if one person can talk to me this way, maybe it's possible that this can happen more. Um, there were people who did try to build connection with me. I can remember being on a psych unit and having headphones and a nurse coming up and saying, "Oh, what are you listening to?" And I told her, and it was a title of a song with, well, I'll just say it. So, I hope swears don't offend you. And it said, "Kiss me because I'm shit faced." And it's a Boston Irish punk band called the Dropkick Murphys, and she said, "Oh, I know where a lot of punk bands play in this area. Are you interested?" And in that moment, she was connecting with me. She was sharing an interest instead of judging, shaming, or making a face and walking away, she tried to connect with me in that moment. And finding that care with human connection and care to be curious about what is actually going on for the person can be really hard to do when we're in a container that is about containing, controlling, um, coercing and correcting somebody. And so I have to say, kudos to everybody here who's trying to do that. That is a tough job. And I'm so grateful for the people who made those efforts, the people who hugged me, even though the rule was you can't touch a patient, the people who allowed me to have my headphones, even though it was against the rules, the people who could accept that maybe sleeping in a bed was not going to work for me, that I was actually more comfortable sleeping on the floor when I was having a huge trauma response. And so I just want to recognize that the work you're doing is so challenging for numerous reasons, one of which is the predominant fear, stigma, or approach or way of viewing people who have these experiences. And so at one point, I was on Thorazine and I had Department of Mental Health Services from the state of Massachusetts, and an outreach worker came to my house and said, "You're doing wonderful." And I said, "I have no life. I smoke cigarettes, drink coffee, watch TV all day." And she said, "Yes, but you're not getting into trouble." And when she said that, I realized her version of recovery for me was horizontal, or stable. Some people call it stable. And I thought that's not a life I want to live. If this is as good as it gets, I'm not so interested. And in that moment, I thought about how peer support in the form of 12-step programs that helped me. I thought maybe there's something like that for what I'm going through. And I put in my Google search mental health peer support. And I found out I was living within walking distance of one of the Wildflower Alliance spaces. Like, wow. And in there, people did talk to me like I was a person. They did have curiosity about my story and my words. And they realized that whatever distress I had was in a context, not just a family context or a school context, but in a greater world. And in the greater world, there are things like poverty, there are things like people getting marginalized, there is all sorts of things going on. And it was wonderful to be seen, heard, and validated. The other thing they did was they gave me possibilities. Not that any one thing they thought was the answer, but they were like, there are so many things to try. I can remember someone asking me to try Reiki, and I was, the Marty part of me is not that friendly, and I was like, I don't believe in it. And they said, you don't have to believe in it, just come and try it. And I said, all right, as long as you know I don't believe in it. And they did it. And when the Reiki person was done, I said to her, what did you do? I feel good. And it was legal. Like, how'd you do that? And she said, I just put good energy into you. And I said, I guess I need that. And then I went on to take Reiki 1 and 2. But I wouldn't have had those opportunities if they weren't freely presented. And I can remember talking to the director of the Wildflower Alliance, and I would say, what if I only like trauma-informed yoga 4 times? And she said, great. What if I don't like it at all? She said, great. Then you learn something you didn't like and try something else. Let's keep trying things to see what works for you. So it's more about providing opportunity versus answers or prescriptions or whatnot. And so the other amazing thing about the Wildflower Alliance was and is that they have the longest consecutive running hearing voices group in the entire United States. And I went to that group, and sometimes people say, oh, Wildflower Alliance, like, I don't know, maybe we're because we talk about alternatives, sometimes I think people get threatened, but I want you to know that we're recognized by the World Health Organization. Hearing voices groups are recognized by the World Health Organization. It's not just a bunch of people who have a space in Western Massachusetts. They also recognize our peer-run respite. It was the first peer-run respite in Massachusetts, a FEA house. At a point in my life where I had slowly, safely gone off all my psych drugs, I had hit a bump in the road and I was facing forced commitment. And I wanted to see if I could go through an extreme experience without being extremely medicated. And I didn't know if I could do it, but I wanted to have the chance to try. And so I got to go to a FIA. It was right when it had opened. And they said this thing to me. They said, what if anything is helpful about being in the hospital? And can we recreate that without you having to go there? Great question, right? And I ask people that all the time now, and I get lots of different answers. The answer I had, though, was I hate to say it, but sometimes there is something helpful about locking me in a room for 3 or 4 days. And what they said to me was, we have rooms and they lock, but from the inside. If it helps you to take away all the sensory stuff, to lie on the floor and not engage, if that helps your mind quiet or whatever it is you're going through, you have permission to do that here. And it was this, I'm not sure if it's ironic, but in the hospital, they could put me in a room in isolation and they could call that treatment. But what do they call it if I want to stay in my room? And now it becomes a symptom. You've taught me a strategy, but if I employ it, somehow it's still seen as a symptom of a disease. So a little bit more about the Hearing Voices Network. It's been around a really, really long time. The first group started in 1988 in Manchester, England. My friend Paul Baker started it, and it's been slow coming to the US. And I just want to explain that Hearing Voices, when it's being used in the format of Hearing Voices Network, is meant to be an umbrella term. And just like many groups of people who have been marginalized, sometimes they take the words that most marginalize them and they reclaim them, and they reclaim them with pride. And so if you talk to people in the UK movement, they'll say, I'm a proud voice hearer, and so that's why they took that word, because that's one of the most marginalized pieces of these, different, extreme, or unusual experiences. And so I might be I might see something, I might smell something. This is really amazing because sometimes there can be an odor that brings up a past memory. Sometimes a past memory can bring up an odor. Sometimes people have, my Reiki teacher once said to me, I can smell cigarettes in the room. That means my mother is present. Like, people have these experiences, and the etc. can be just unusual beliefs are different ways of describing these experiences. Somebody might be talking about somebody stealing my thoughts, somebody, is sending me messages. We're not tied to the word hearing voices. People can come to these groups and define their experiences in any way they want, and how they may describe it may change over time, and that's great. We don't have to agree. We're just here to provide a space where people can have these conversations without being pathologized. Instead, we're approaching it with curiosity. How did you come to that belief, and how does that belief impact your life? And so the US in 2010 launched the Hearing Voices Network USA, and sometimes people say, you guys are anti-psychiatry. And I'll say, wow, the person who started the whole movement, one of the people was a psychiatrist, is a psychiatrist. And we're welcome to psychiatrists to being a part of it. The last psychiatrist I had was just an amazing guy, and he was also trained as a neurologist. And he would say to me, "You have these well-worn neural pathways, but we can make new ones. There's neuroplasticity. You have learned to engage with the world this way, and it's possible to change." And I asked, "Well, what would you give me for a diagnosis?" And he goes, "I would say you're a human being." And I said, "I like that diagnosis." And he was also the person who told me after decades that I had to stop taking drugs marketed as antipsychotics because I was shaking and twitching and falling down. And he said, "I don't care what happens in your life, who dies, you have to learn a new way to navigate because these drugs are impairing your neurological system." And so he was the one who gave me a lot of support to, like I say, slowly, carefully, go down on these drugs and at the same time put in other tools. How are the other ways I can navigate these voices and experiences? And his name is Robert Emerson Gardner, a Yale guy and a cool guy. And I will mention Yale too, because it's doing research on what is the difference between the person at the psychic fair who talks to the people on the other side, other people who say they hear voices or have visions. What is the difference between those people and the people who end up in the psychiatric system? So Yale's doing this really interesting research about that. And so here are two of the values of the movement that, no matter how weird, different, I don't get it, that I see somebody's doing, saying, or acting, I'm coming from the assumption that somehow it makes sense in the context of their life. Someone has a huge fear. Maybe that fear doesn't match this moment, but that fear is coming from somewhere. And so I'm going to be curious about that. And the reality is, lots of people hear voices and don't end up in the psychiatric system. Some of them become authors, artists, songwriters. There's lots of examples of those people out there. But for some of us, there is difficulty, right? So the problem isn't the voices themselves, but the difficulty navigating it. And this psychiatrist Marius would say, don't shoot the messenger. Those voices have a meaning, not necessarily one to be literal, but they're trying to grab your attention and point it somewhere. And let's be curious about that. So here's where I would like to do a poll. I want to ask people, what color is that dress? And we'll give it a few seconds. Jen, on your end, can you see if people are filling it out?
Yes, I can see if folks are filling it out. We've got, so far we still have folks answering. We've got about 300, oh boy, they're answering really fast. So we'll give them a second. So
Okay.
We'll give them a little more minute here. About 50% have participated, and we've gotten some input in the chat. So we are, okay, we're about at 60%. We're slowing up. Do you want to go ahead and pause
Yeah,
here?
so just tell me, like who wins? Who won the vote?
All right. We'll go ahead and end the poll for us. And we have on the results, we've got white and gold has won the poll with 52%.
Wow, because I'm a white and gold person. So therefore, the majority of people said white and gold, and I say white and gold. So everybody else, I'm going to tell you you're wrong. And Jen, what did you see?
I saw white and gold as well.
How about Molly? What did you see?
I see blue and gold.
Anybody? I know a bunch of people see black, right? But in any event, if I tell somebody, they tell me what they see and I tell them they're wrong, does that build connection? No.
No.
I used to think when people told me, it wasn't real, you're wrong, or there's something wrong with you that you see or hear something different, I used to think that they were calling me a liar. Does that build connection? No. No, I did this with commitment lawyers, and I told them, well, the people who have the majority, they get to decide what reality is, and the rest of you have some kind of problem, but we should try to figure out what it is. And they didn't like it. They didn't like it. And so if you take away anything from this, please realize that people are having real experiences. If somebody tells me they see black, I believe them. And in person, if we had it up on a screen, I'll be walking around the room trying to see black too. Like, if I look this way, can I see the black? If I look that way? And just because I can't see it doesn't mean they're not. Is that resonating at all? I hope so. So if I go from the place of I believe that this is what they're seeing, hearing, or experiencing, that's the sensation, what I like to do next in the hearing voices movement approach would be to look for the meaning, right? And sometimes there are voices or visions that hold a meaning. And it may be a metaphor, or it might be a feeling. It might be a feeling that's being held. And let's be curious about that. Another general strategy is to talk with people, particularly those who have similar experiences. I was talking with a woman yesterday, and she had a voice that was telling her that she should end her life, which is a voice that a number of people get. And I said, you're not the only one. That blew her mind. That made her feel better to know she's not the only person who's heard a voice like that. And then I shared, different things that it might mean. I shared what it meant for me, what it meant for another friend of mine. Maybe it's saying my life is unsustainable the way it is. Maybe it's not my heart that needs to die, but a relationship in my life. It's telling me that going along this way is too hard. Or a voice like that might be representing a message that, for me, I collected messages like that growing up. And for me, it was more of a trauma messages echoing from the past. And once I realized, oh, I have been told that before, and who told me that? I was like, well, what else is new? They've always been out to get me. And it lost a lot of its power. And I got to unpack what it was saying and decide whether I believed what it said or not. And all right, so the psychiatrist, Myers Roll, and this researcher, Sandra Escher, they do all this research on people hearing voices, and, in the Netherlands, and they find out that a third of the people who were hearing voices were never ending up in the mental health system. And they were living, rewarding lives. And Marius had a theory, and as a good scientist, he wanted to test his theory. And he was wondering if the difference between people who navigated it well and the people who got stuck, was it all in the way that they understood their experience? So if I believe I have a disease, or if I believe I have aliens, or if I believe I have demons, does that impact my ability to create a worthwhile life? And so the results of his research was people who tended to move through the experience better were people who felt themselves to be stronger than their voices and communicated more often about to their voices, set limits and listened selectively, and use fewer distraction techniques. And there was one group of people who tended to keep stuck. There were like all these different ways you can understand it and not stay stuck, but there was one way that would keep people stuck. Can anybody take a guess at it and put it in the chat, and then maybe someone can read the chat to me? What way of understanding this experience could keep you stuck?
So trying to make them go away, denying the voices,
Oh,
believing it's an illness.
so I love that, because that was a strategy that I was given in the mental health system. Ignore, deny, distract. And in my experience, denial has never been a good strategy in my life. And I've done that research often of trying to deny stuff and hoping it would go away. It just didn't work. And unfortunately, old school, or in the beginning of my interface with the mental health system, that's all it had to offer was ignore, deny, and distract. And so people who believe they have a brain disease and believe that their best hope is a better medication, they may stay stuck, right? They might. If they're giving the tools of deny, distract, and ignore, they may stay stuck. And so imagine this. What happens if you have a 3-year-old and you ignore that 3-year-old? What does that 3-year-old do? It gets louder. It gets more provocative. It demands your attention. Guess what? So do voices. They say, pay attention to me. And they get louder. And so in that effort to ignore, deny, and distract actually made my experience more difficult. It actually made my experience more difficult when somebody said, we just have to get you on the right cocktail. Because it set up this expectation that the drugs would get rid of the voices, which it does for some people some of the time for a while. But for a lot of people, it doesn't really get rid of the voices. It just gets rid of me having an emotional response to it. Or sedates me so much, like I said, I was on Thorazine, I can't think my way out of a paper bag, right? That was my experience with it. So anyways, I'm at this Wildflower Alliance. They're going to open this peer run respite, but they're going to have Chris Hansen and Sherry Mead come in from intentional peer support to train the staff. And I'm on disability. I'm off the Thorazine. Now I'm just on Haldol. And I say, can I go to the training? I'm a community member. Can I go to the training? And the director says, I don't know. I'll try to get you in. And I got in, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is a whole different way of being in relationship. And so the top 3 of the principals, instead of somebody coming in, spending 15 minutes with me and then telling me how they're going to help me, we're both trying to learn from each other. And that, it's not all about me changing. It's all about us figuring out how to be together or what work we want to do together. It's about the relationship. And instead of everything being about fear, it's about possibilities. So those are the principles, and here are the tasks: connection, worldview, mutuality, moving towards. I know my friend Jude is here virtually and can respond to questions people have about intentional peer support. I can't see it, but I believe my tech team is dropping in links for people. And anyways, so from individual to relationship, instead of just me having to change and people having goals for me, and it's all around fixing our problem solving, instead, we all change. And that last psychiatrist I had, he changed and I changed. And we learned from each other. And we used to trade books. Have you read this book? Oh, you read this book. What do you think of that book? And we would go back and forth. And it was incredible. I'm actually been working with a psychiatrist in the LABA, IPI, and if I could pronounce his name correctly, I would, but it's very long and very Greek. But Dr. IPI, and we did a training together for veterans and people in clinical roles, voices, visions, and veterans. And it was really awesome. He's also trained as an anthropologist, so he's big into the context of what somebody's experience is in. And so, anyways, we try to figure out together how to be in relationship. And this whole thing about having relationship, somebody might think, oh, my recovery is based on meeting goals. My recovery might be based on having a healthy relationship. My recovery might be based on reclaiming my story and being able to figure out what I need and how I want to interact with people. That might be the work. Just trying to be in a relationship with somebody. So here's a quick example of moving from fear to hope and possibility. I was invited to speak at an alternatives conference in Texas. I'm not in a paid role. I'm still on disability. But I get invited to speak to this conference. I tell my therapist, she says, don't go, you'll get locked up down there. We'll never get you back. I tell my family, and I'm kind of gender non-conforming, and they're like, don't go to Texas. They have guns. They'll kill you. You're too weird. And I went to the director of Wildflower, Sarah, and I said, I don't know if I should go. And she gave me a hope and possibility response. She said, what would you need in order to go? How do we make this work? Instead of feeding into fear and having all this creative imagination of how everything can go wrong, let's have some creative, positive imagination. And I told her I needed a crew. I needed a bunch of people. And I needed my own hotel room. I went, it was great. The keynote was great. And my window for being present in the here and now and being with people disappeared by the time I was in the airport. For a voice here, I lose my filter and now everything's just like, overwhelming. And I start walking, kind of like a little kid. I want to find a closet to hide it. And my team, my crew gets in a circle around me and they all sit down. I sit down. And now I have a force field. And everywhere I look is meaning, purpose, and connection. We get on that airplane. I pull the hoodie over my eyes and I bawl my eyeballs out. And nobody says, are you in crisis? Are you decompensating? No, what they said instead to me is, you pushed your envelope and we're going to keep pushing it until it gets bigger and bigger. They kept hope. They let me cry. It was really healing to be able to let that out. Anyways, so, if we really want human rights based approaches, we need to think about how to power with, while sharing power with and acknowledging trauma. And one of those things is, inviting people to share their experience in their own words. Instead of somebody else telling me my experience, empower me to find words for it or ways of looking at it, being honest about power differentials, being upfront and honest about your limits. It's a really lousy feeling when a therapist or somebody says, oh, stay right here, I'll be right back. And they're making a phone call to the crisis team to come, but they don't tell that to my face. Whatever those rules are of engagement are, it'd be great to be upfront and honest. And to recognize that even when containment might be needed, that's also creating harm. And to be able to acknowledge that. So if we're trying to connect, that's our destination. How do we get there? Validation, curiosity, vulnerability, and community. Validation, I see you, I accept you as you are, and I want to partner with you. I want to find out more. How can I have the answer for you when I don't know what the answer is that you would want, or if I don't know what's going on? I value your individual story. I see you as a human being, not as a patient or a case member. I want to know, like in my work with families, they'll call me up about something, and I'm going to ask them what happened a year ago. How did we get to this moment in time? Right? Because that's going to help me understand what is actually happening in this moment in time. Absolutely check assumptions. Vulnerability, I have my strengths and weaknesses. I get to be honest and own whatever they are, which might be, I don't know what to say, but I'm really glad you're telling me. Or it might be, I'm trying to follow what you're saying. Can you talk a little bit slower so I can catch every word? But I'm owning it. I'm owning it as my need versus making a you statement. Um, Community, we're not alone. Our connection exists in a wider community. And so, yeah, please check out that Wildflower website. Between trainings, online support groups, there are also an online support group for people working in provider roles. There's so many opportunities to connect. And so what I try to do with people is make a pact. I need to pause and soak in what they're saying. And instead of responding, reacting, I need to consider how to respond. Can I be curious? Can I check assumptions I might be making? Because if I make assumptions, it can move things to, distressing, disruptive, destructive, or dangerous. I'll tell you a thing that happened was, I had this great intent and it didn't turn out that way. I asked somebody where they grew up and they got really upset. And I apologized. I said, do you want to tell me what's going on? And she said, I grew up in foster care and you just reminded me of some of the worst experiences in my life. And I could apologize for that and say, thank you for telling me, you know. Anyways, I consider everybody's needs. Um, maybe I need to sleep and somebody needs to yell their voices. Is there a way that we can figure out that I get to sleep and they can yell at their voices? Do I need to get earplugs? Do I need, does that person need a room with more soundproofing? And together we can partner. So this is more like supported decision making versus sharing it. Like somebody has the right to make a decision, and I'm going to support them to make the best decision they can. I'm hoping with the best information they'll make better decisions. Sometimes somebody's having a crisis and it's not the person hearing the voices. Sometimes it's the people around them are frightened. So I'm going to tell you a story. I have 5 kids. One of my kids went through an awful violent event, and we attempted to use the criminal justice system, and it just made everything worse for this young man. And so, anyways, this my son, who a huge kid, he got 5th place in 8th grade in the nationals in the heavyweight division for wrestling. Big boy, right? And he is in my kitchen swinging a machete. I am having a crisis. My heart's pounding. I'm freaking out. And at the time, I had this service, which is kind of like a watered down open dialogue where you could call 24/7 and talk to somebody and they could coach you through the moment. And I called and the person said, is he yelling? I said, no. Is he breaking anything? I said, no. And they said, why don't you ask him what he's doing? I said, hey, what are you doing? And he said, shh, be real quiet. And you can hear the blade cut the air. which was kind of like this great thing because it made me calm down to be real quiet and to focus on listening. I said, yeah, I can hear it. Now, can you do that outside? Because I'm losing my mind. Can you do that in the backyard? And he did. So in this moment, family members will call me up and we have to go through this list of what is happening and whether it is actually dangerous. Because no matter how bad things are, you can always make them worse. And sometimes we have the power to make them better. So I have to think about what our action would be that and how would impact that situation. And I did not turn on the volume for this, but you'll get the visual. So telling somebody to calm down, instead I try to create a place where they can let that anger out in a way that's not going to hurt anybody, including themselves. I tried to partner with them in the anger. I somebody who worked with me did a lot of FU therapy. We would drive around and yell and scream in the car. And I could yell at people who had hurt me in my life, and it was a way of containing that anger but getting it out. And he told me, you have to get the anger out or you turn it in. So it's not about people not having anger. It's about what are the ways they can get it out, and can we get it out proactively. So in that moment with my son or with anybody, okay, if this is actually dangerous, what will help decrease the danger or increase it? So think about if I had called the police and said, my son's in the kitchen with a machete. My son that you guys know. Oh my gosh, stop. What would have happened? What would the police have done? I would have taken that situation, it would have turned into something. Yeah. That was my timer. I need to hurry up. So anyways, call up my huge son is in the kitchen with a machete. You know this son I'm talking about. What would they have done? It would have been more dangerous. They quite likely would have killed my son. They would come with fear and they want to protect people. And here's an armed person with a diagnosis. And so I have to think about that. What will I do? Sometimes people will say, oh, the person's yelling, I'm afraid someone's going to call the police. Well, you telling them to stop or crowding their space, is that going to change the outcome or is it going to make it worse? And so we try to talk these things through. Fear can be contagious, so can calm. Somebody says to me, he's coming to get me, they're out to get me, they want to kill me. And I say, you're here with me. They would have to come through me. I'm going to stay with you and partner with you. Will it help if we lock the door? That's what I'm going to do in that moment. I'm going to try to be calm and breathe. Sometimes in one of the family groups, somebody told another group member how to breathe. No, this is the four corners breathing will relax you. And the other person said, F you, I know how to breathe. I have a right to my anger. But yeah, it's not great to tell people those things unless you have a different kind of relationship with them. But if I breathe, if I say, hey, this is really big, I'm going to take a big breath and try to calm myself down. I'm just sharing information, right? I'm not being over. Whatever I do in that moment with this person, I also have to consider the impact to the relationship. Am I doing this in a respectful way? Am I partnering to the best of my ability? Am I owning my limitations? And this last one, being building trust and being flexible about forms of communication. That last psychiatrist I saw, when I met him, I would write him notes and he would write me notes back, because at the time my voice hearing experience was such that I couldn't understand what he was saying. Like, even if I understood every word, I couldn't hold each word together long enough to get a sentence. And there were times where I would tell him, I want you to write me notes about this session because I'm going to forget it. Can you write me notes for me to walk away with? Which he would do. So yeah, build connection, honoring multiple truths. We don't have to argue about reality. We can be curious. If somebody has a belief, it could lead towards something bad happening. I can say, if you do this, this might be the consequence. But I'm not telling them they're right or wrong. I'm just saying this is information. Or I can tell them what my fear is. So frequently we see the tip of the iceberg. This is another IPS type slide. Can we be curious of what's underneath that iceberg? When somebody says, I have a voice trying to kill myself, what might it mean? We talked a little bit about that. It might mean it's a voice telling you need to change how you're living your life. It could be a voice telling you something that echoing something from the past. When I was 12, I had a voice telling me to kill myself or my mother. I knew I wouldn't kill my mother. I didn't want to kill me. What that voice was trying to do was tell me to stand up to my mother. It was telling me you need to stop letting her hit you. But it had to be really loud and provocative. I had somebody tell me the doctor on this unit is an agent. And I was thinking, oh, like CIA, FBI, like, is that what this is? And I said, can you explain that? And she said, yeah, he's a travel agent. He gets to decide where I go and when. I was like, wow. So I'm going to be curious about these metaphors. When people say, oh, they're not making any sense, I believe people are making sense. We just have to decode it. The Maastricht interview, which someone will drop in the thing, also comes out of the Hearing Voices movement. Some people are trained to do it in a clinical setting. Great questions. What happened the year before you started hearing voices? Any major life events? Have you heard those messages before? Where do you think they come from? There's this amazing thing too, where if somebody has voices that are different ages and they don't age, sometimes that voice might be holding something that happened in their life at that age. So say I'm an adult and I have a 6-year-old voice or a 12-year-old voice. You might ask somebody, what was going on when you were 6? So it's just really neat. I've never done the interview, but I've answered some of the questions, but I've never gone through that process. But it's if you're wondering, how do I be curious? It has a lot of great questions you could ask that might help somebody organize their experience. When I did finally talk in a hearing voices group, I went for 3 months and didn't talk. When I finally did talk, I said, these are my diagnoses and this is how screwed up I am. And they said, hey, you're still on the planet. You must have some strategies. They mirrored back strength. I had people help me get perspective on moving through shame and guilt. I finally found a place where I could say something where everything I said wouldn't be held against me, right? This is with a group of people who might be able to relate, might be able to ask questions. And all those messages from trauma, I got to see, I could tell, and nothing bad happened. I learned tons of new possibilities. Like instead of having the yes, no argument about medication, it was so funny in the group. They said, there's a lot of stuff between Thorazine and nothing. Do you think you could talk them into trying something in between? And the thing was, I always went in there saying, no, I don't want to take any. And I always got more. And to learn to have a conversation instead of I'd like to try going down and see what happens. And these are just support principles. We're not going to cover them. I don't have time. But I do want to say small changes are huge. Instead of measuring where you want the person to be, which may or may not be where they want to be, instead measure how far they've come. I also want to challenge, sometimes people say, I just want them to be normal. I'm like, in this day and age, what the heck is normal? Turn on the news. Like, what is normal? Like, I don't know anymore. People have lots of different beliefs and they do whatever, all sorts of things. So instead of imagining whether something's normal or not, it's more like, is it really creating any harm? Like protective factors, accepting relationships, opportunities to belong, opportunities to name and express feelings, choice and power. I can remember someone telling me on a mental health unit when I was in isolation, he said to me, you're making decisions and your decisions have consequences. In that moment, I felt totally powerless on my third day in isolation. And I said to him, what are the different decisions I can make to get the heck out of this room? And he said, just quit talking for 24 hours. And of course, I said, do you have a pill for that? Can you help me out with that? And but I didn't know I had that power. So helping people locate their power is really cool. And the one thing I want to say on this is sometimes parents are so concerned. They're constantly asking somebody, how are you doing? How was your day? Did everything go okay? And the person may feel like the parent's harassing them or being aggressive. They're not taking it like, can we have a normal conversation? And I negotiate it, and they'll hide in their room more because every time they come out, somebody's like jumping in to check on them. And so with one family, we negotiated that the dad and the son are gonna watch 3 ball games together a week. That's how they're gonna connect, right? They're gonna do something that they enjoy together versus this check-in thing. Power of family. Families have the timeline. They hold the whole person. In the mental health system, they're getting a snapshot. But it's important to know, what is that person's strength, history, timeline. They can give positive messages. They can hold this positive vision. They can give competing messages to harassing voices. They can tell somebody, a voice is giving their loved one a hard time. They can tell that voice, do not talk to my child that way. These slides are going to be shared. The other important role about family and parents is that they can support informed consent. What are the consequences, the potential effects of taking this drug or that treatment? They can share rights and information. I have a very sad story where somebody went to the ER on Friday. They had unusual beliefs, but they were at the ER because they were dizzy and had headaches. And the ER was going to commit them. And the mother called and I said, get him out of there because they're not addressing his medical issue. Somehow she got him out of there, brought them to a different hospital. And it turned out that her son has a lesion on his brain. But like he wasn't, because he had unusual beliefs, they were not listening to what was happening for him medically. Like they weren't ruling things out. So important. So advocating, for different options, different services. And I think this is my punchline, or that's my punchline. People will say, but we've tried everything. And I'll say, no, you haven't. No, you haven't. Have you tried neurofeedback? Have you tried somatic therapy? Have you tried internal family systems? Have you tried sports and exercise? Have you tried proactively releasing anger? Have you tried peer supports? And where I live in my part of the country, the indigenous people, when they're evil spirits or evil forces, they sing, dance, and shake a rattle. And believe me, singing, dancing, and shaking a rattle really changes the mood in the room. I was doing a group on a political unit, one that I had been confined to, and I could not get people to listen to each other. They all wanted to sing, and so we agreed on a song. The whole group started singing, all different ages, backgrounds, dancing and shaking. And joy was all over the place. When we left, my co-trainer said, I don't know if we did our job. We didn't share resources. And I said, we did our job. They had meaning, purpose, and connection in that moment. They had joy. That's probably the brightest moment they've had in I don't know how long. So my healing path involves being seen, heard, and validated, being part of my own rescue, locating my power, getting resources, and it's possible. And so healing can happen through relationships. I'm not going to leave this slide up because you guys can get a copy of it. And I think a lot of materials already gone into the chat. But if we have any time for questions, people can let me know, or comments.
Cindy,
Thank you.
that was outstanding. Oh my goodness. I just want to just pause. You've received so many positive comments today, not only about how much folks loved today's presentation, but there are people here in this space that have really been impacted by your work and your care, and that you've made their lives really deeply meaningful. So thank you for that. Just really wanted to point that out. Cindy, we are at time.
Okay.
We've gotten a number of questions that have come in. They've been super, super good. And what we'd like to do is I'm going to get them to you, and some of them that we can do then get back to you then to do some answers. Because
let me just tell people I'm going
Yes.
to Alaska to work with indigenous people who are reclaiming their culture next week. So I will respond to your emails, but it might take a week or two.